If you have a Bible and you'd like to read along with the reading, please turn it to 2 Corinthians chapter 3. This is where we'll spend our time. Last week I told you all a story that was personal to me. And it was a story about the fact that I had come to a place on a particular weekend where Becky and I were together and we were going out to eat. And I remember where I was when I said it. I remember the whole conversation right there on Tomberlin Road in the car. I was so happy that day. It was just one of those days where the sky is bluer, the grass is greener, and everything tastes and smells better because I had just made a large deposit in the bank. And I was just filled up with happiness about that. And so it seems that we as human beings find a lot of things earthly that make us happy. I don't know that that's always a bad thing, but in some ways it can be a distraction. It seems to me that a lot of times when things are going happily, that when God intervenes in our life to bring us to a place of some usefulness to Him, it's not a welcome thing. It's an interruption. It interrupts that continuum of happiness that we've discovered as we're on our way to eat out because we've just put a large deposit in the bank. It's an interruption. How many times have we been in an encounter wherein the movement of that day has been completely disrupted, and it's actually been something that God brought into our life that He wanted us to be involved with at that moment? A lot of Christians, you may not, any of you in this room, see God this way, but a lot of believers see God, because of this very question, as a kind of cosmic police officer who's just waiting to bring the hammer down. Lots of I know some of them who've been right here in this church who look at God that way. Let's see if we can find ourselves in the descriptions that Paul is going to give us in this particular text. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, I'll begin reading in verse 12. Therefore, since we have such a hope, we behave with great boldness, not like Moses, who used to put a veil over his face to keep the Israelites from staring at the result of the glory that had been made ineffective. But their minds were closed. For to this very day, the same veil remains whenever the Jews hear the Old Covenant read. It has not been removed, because only in Christ is the veil taken away. Until this very day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over the Jewish mind. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is present, there is freedom. And we all, with unveiled faces, reflecting the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another, which is from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Very interesting text. There's a lot of theology here. I don't know if you're aware of that, if you noticed it. A lot of what we believe, when the New Testament writers wrote, this includes the gospel writers and all of the letters, they wrote with an implicit understanding about who God was. It wasn't something spelled out explicitly. There's no place in the New Testament where you see God is revealed to us in three persons and yet there's one God. But when you see a text like this one, you see that that was just the implicit understanding. The Spirit is God, the Father is God, the Son is God, and yet there's one God. And it's just laid there for you and I to think about. It's not explained in any way. Very interesting to me. And Paul, when he speaks here about a veil being put over the eyes, mind, or the eye of the mind's eye of the Jewish nation, he's talking about it in the sense that not that they couldn't understand the law. They understood the law perfectly well, just like any of you and I. If we go to a swimming pool and there's the big poster up there that tells you what you can and can't do, we all understand it. But do we think about the intent behind it? Well, that was where the thing was veiled to the Jews. They did not understand the intent. Paul calls the law our schoolmaster. That was the intent. The intent was to take all that 1,500 years and to bring this nation to a place where they understood the severity of sin in God's eyes. That's what the whole purpose was. And to bring us to the place in history where God would intervene on behalf of all of humanity to bring about a redemption, a recovery, a solution to the problem. Well, a lot of Christians, a lot of them, maybe none of you in this room, but I'll bet you there are times wherein we all see God as the cosmic police officer. Or maybe a little less than that, maybe we see God as the being who's going to shut down the fun. Something we really want to do, we're engaged in it, we think it's a good thing, and maybe it's something we really maybe ought not to do, but we see God as the one who's going to shut the fun down. He's not going to bring something good. He's the cosmic police officer with the baton who's going to give us the smack across the back of the head and make sure that whatever fun thing we were involved in gets stopped. Now, why is that? Why do we see God like that at all? And I think, I can speak for myself, it's universal. All of us at some time or another find ourselves looking at God as the person who's going to shut it down. Whatever it is we think we want to be doing. Why is that? Well, it's because there's this deep, deep, deep depth of sin in every person in this room, every human being who's ever taken a breath. We've all got it. We're infected by it. And this deep, deep, deep effect of sin causes us to do things, to think things, to be things that are not at all the way God intended us to be. And one of these is we hide. We hide. Think about this for a moment. I don't know if you've ever thought about it this way. You look back at the first two humans. I don't care how you read that. Let's just take it for what it is. The first two humans, what did they do right after they sinned? What was the first thing they did? They hid. They hid. And we have inherited that desire to be hidden, not just from God, but in every aspect of our living. Nobody in this room is who they really are right this minute, including me. Nobody. Every one of us in this room have aspects of who we are that none of us in this room have ever seen before. None of us. Think about this for just a minute, how deep this really goes. Think about it in terms of human formation. All right, God has given us this incredible power as human beings. We procreate. We procreate. Can you imagine a more powerful thing in the world? That you and I have the ability, through the institution of marriage, to bring about another soul into existence. That is just incredible to me. And yet, that's what God has given us to do. So here we are. We come into the world, and an infant comes into the world, I'm going to say I don't know what an infant's consciousness is like. Nobody does, because we can't ask them and have them tell us. As a matter of fact, you may keep this as a bee in your bonnet. One of the great controversies in the world right now is, what is a human being? Is a human being just a collection of cells and particles moving around that happens to think with the illusion that it's self-aware? Or is a human being a physical thing that also has an immaterial component in it, which you and I call biblically the soul, the person, the real self, that is using the body in order for this period of time to live? Now, you may not think that's a big deal, but it is a big deal. Huge conversation in the studies of the mind right now, whether it's a dual thing or a singular thing. Are we just material, or are we material plus? God says we're material plus, so I'm good with that. I feel pretty confident about that. But think about the way we come into the world. There's no sense when I look at a newborn infant that I'm looking at somebody who is thinking about the world, really. There's a sense in which a newborn infant is reactive to the world. The reactive nature of the newborn carries through into toddlerhood to a large degree. How do I know that? Because you can find some little boy who feels perfectly comfortable for weeks on end wearing a towel clipped to his neck like Superman and just going around like that all the time. No inhibition is felt, not embarrassed by it. The parents may think it's a little strange, and then the other people look at it and we find it humorous. We don't think it's bad. We don't think, you need to take that towel off. Do you realize how silly you look? No, little kid doesn't realize how silly they look at all. You see some little kid walking around in a diaper. They don't care. I'll never forget, when I was an elder in Pennsylvania, this was the weirdest thing I ever did. There was a family who was going on a self-financed mission trip, a short-term mission trip. They had gone through a parachurch organization, signed up, paid the fees, gone to the little classes that they had to go to in order to go and do a short-term mission trip in Guatemala. It was only going to last a week. Well, our church was a little strange this way. They expected that you would pass that through the elders of the church first, which they had not done. And so that the elders, I was one of them, I didn't understand that. But anyway, they commissioned me to go to their house and talk to them about this particular short-term mission trip that they had not passed through the elders. So when I got there, I was standing on the driveway talking to them, and I couldn't stand it. I just said, I got to say this to you guys. I have no idea what I'm doing here right now. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. You guys are grown-ups. You're believers. You paid for the mission trip. You want to go on the mission trip. I'm good with that, but I was sent here. And they just laughed. We were all friends. They knew why I was there. They weren't at all offended by it. Very mature believers. Well, I'm standing there talking to them, and their yard was about 200 feet deep. It was about as deep as this would be out to the road. And there was a big white wooden fence across there. And I'm looking at them, and I see something out of the corner of my eye. And I look, and it's a little girl. And she's completely unclad, running across the yard. Now, I didn't know what to do, because at the distance I thought it looked like their daughter, but I wasn't sure. And I'm looking, and the mom turns around, and she just starts laughing, and then runs down there to catch her. Well, when we got assembled back on the driveway, her mom says, she does that all the time. We don't know why. She feels like when she needs to run naked, she just runs naked. And they didn't ever chastise her for it. They didn't feel like it was something that needed to be corrected. They figured she'd outgrow it, which she did. She grew up to be a nice young woman. But there was something about that I looked at it, and I remember it to this day. It was so pure, is the only word I know to put to it. There was nothing about it that was impure. It was just what she wanted to do, and there she was doing it. And she thought nothing of it. Well, it doesn't take very long for that innocence that we've all had in one form or another to be eroded by time. And it's eroded because we have friction with other human beings. Somebody notices something about our nose, and they tell us in the first grade. Or somebody notices something about our legs, and they tell us in the first grade. Or something about our hair, or whatever it is. And as we go through life, we become what I would call guarded adults. And we learn how to hide. We learn how to be what we want people to see us to be, even though that's not really the person that we are. Childhood experience molds us. Now you think, well, that just sounds like a really interesting pop psychology lesson. No, look in the Bible. There's plenty of it in the Bible. If you don't think that how we grow up matters, read the life of Solomon. And look at the family Solomon came from and all the turmoil in that family. Why do you think Solomon turned out to be the way he was? It wasn't just because. It was because of all that had happened to him in that family as he grew up. So what happens to us? We come to adulthood and we want, I think, it seems to me, we want something of that innocence back. What is the innocence we're searching for? We want somebody to really, really know us fully and yet accept us fully. That's what we're looking for. And so what do? We get married. That's what we do. We get married. And marriage becomes a place where we can start to find some of that again. We find a place where somebody really learns all about us over years, and yet they accept us. Some of you in here have been married for 5 decades plus, so you know all about that idea. Right? All of us, we're looking for that. We want that in life. Daily living, however, starts to wear away at the sense of innocence that we might discover in that relationship. And it becomes kind of the sameness starts to filter into it. And so the wonder that there's this person over here who loves me and yet knows a lot of things about me that none of you would know, or nor would I tell you, it starts to kind of become taken for granted and no longer seen as the wonder that it is. I remember when I was first married, I don't know if I've shared this with you or not, so this may be risky. I remember we were walking together in Exton Mall, and we had just been married a little while. When you're first married and you have no children, at least in the era of the 80s, going to the mall is a good thing to do. Let's just go to the mall. What are we shopping for? Nothing. We're just going to go to the mall, walk around. And I remember this was a source of wonder for me. I remember walking around, and there are a lot of people coming toward you, and you catch their gaze, and they catch your gaze. I thought, wow, there's only one person in this whole place that knows me like Becky. That was like a wonder to me. I was overcome with it. I don't know if I've ever told you that story. But pretty soon, anything like that is new starts to wear off in terms of the sense of wonder. If you don't think that's true, go to Walmart, and during the normal times of the year, not Christmas, go to the normal times of the year and find cars parked way out on the perimeter of the parking lot. They're usually brand new ones. And they're parked all cattywampus across the lines. Because you don't want somebody coming up next to your new car and swinging a door out and hitting it or bashing it with a shopping cart. And maybe you go to the person who owns the new car and you say, I really need a ride. Could you give me a ride? And they say, sure. And you're holding an ice cream cone. They say, as soon as you finish that, you can get in. And you get in the car and you find the paper mats on top of the rubber mats that the car came with because you don't want any debris on the rubber mat. Well, that doesn't last very long. Pretty soon you've spilled a soda in there and dumped some coffee in it, and a couple of shopping carts have hit it, and now none of that really matters anymore. It's the same with relationships. The relationships start to wear old. And a lot of these things that should be senses of wonder to us kind of go away. One of the things about that is tragic is that some of the most sturdy relationships we rest in fail. People let us down. And that sturdiness shakes us very deeply when it fails underneath us. It's like, do you know one of the most traumatic experiences human beings have is an earthquake? Because the very thing that we just take for granted is always going to be there is suddenly not there in the way that we expect it. John Rosemond, the Christian counselor, says this, and I think there's something to this. He says the greatest gift you can give to any child is a stable marriage. The greatest gift. Why is that? One of the things about being a human being is we have a thread of creativity in us. Do you know what robs creativity more quickly than anything else? Is not having a stable base from which the creativity can grow. If there's not this stability, this place where you're safe, this place where a person can be who they are, the creativity gets squelched in that person because they're not safe anymore. And they start to look at life in a very different way. I remember one time an in-law asking a member of my family, if you could do anything you wanted, what would it be? And the member of my family couldn't really think of anything because the family they came from was not really all that stable. There was a time when for us as human beings, the greatest hope we had in this world was that of heaven. We thought about that, and that provided that sense of stability. I mean, after all, if a person knows that they're going to live forever with the Lord, what can you really do to them? What can you do to somebody who's really confident of that? I remember there's a play, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, I've mentioned it before, but I think it's Eugene O'Neill. And the play has to do, it's called Lazarus Laughed. And the play has Lazarus in it. And Caesar has Lazarus in front of him, and Caesar says, if you don't bow before Caesar, we're going to put you in prison. And Lazarus laughs at him. And then he says, if you don't do it, we're going to torture you. And Lazarus laughs at him again. And he says, you know what? If you don't obey me, I'm going to kill you. And Lazarus just bursts into laughter where he falls on the floor. And he says, I've already been there. What are you going to do to me that I've not already seen? This is after Jesus had raised him from the dead. But here and now, right here as we sit here this minute, I want to ask us the question. Think in your mind, what is the greatest single gift that God gives us right here as we sit here this very minute? Now, some people might say, well, salvation. That's a huge gift. That's a huge gift. But can anybody honestly say, as they sit here right now, that you know what that is? The Bible says we can't even imagine it. So there's something missing there. There's something more that right here and right now, we talked about it a little bit in Sunday school this morning. There's something more that God grants to us as a gift right here and right now. I'll just say what it is for real. It's the sturdiness of a relationship that's absolutely dependable. I do not ever have to worry that anything's going to happen to that relationship with God, ever. That, to me, that is just incredible. I remember when I used to travel with the band, I used to hate it when we'd go somewhere, and there might be 2,000 people in front of us. But I loved the lights because the lights made it where I couldn't see the people. I liked that. When I was walking on stage with a guitar and go start to play, I didn't want to know there was anybody out there, even though I could hear clapping and talking and whatever. But if I walked in front of the beam just enough that I could see the crowd, I would always have my eyes drawn to the one person who seemed to really not be having a good time at all. And that would be what I would think about for the remainder of the time I was playing, was the one person who just looked like that we're killing them. But that is something that's just human in us. But you see, God gives us this incredible gift. He will never be that person in the audience who does not look at us as though he's enjoying the fact that we're there. God's character is so dependable, even in the moments when life is completely painful. That relationship, the sturdiness of it will never let us down. You think, well, how do you know that? Well, it looks to me like he was pleased enough to die for us. That's pretty sturdy. So we have to ask ourselves a question about this. Is the price that God paid for us sufficient for us to trust that God knows all about us more than we even know ourselves, and yet he wants to spend his time with us? Do we think that being ourselves in front of God is risky? Some believers do. Some believers do. They have the picture of God as the cosmic police officer who's going to whack them. That's not the God of the Bible, however. We've been found and we are known. And we are known better than we know ourselves. And we don't have to hide. We don't have to pretend. We don't have to come to God and try to butter him up or pretend to be something we're not in order that he like us. And you know, that is a passive response to God. What about an active one where we choose to bring ourselves to God and tell Him about everything that's on our minds, and tell Him about everything that hurts, tell Him about everything that's good, tell Him about what we really want. What do you want, Rip? What do you want, Marshall? What do you want, Becky, Brad, anybody? And God would ask us that question, and we would tell Him. Now, He might not give it, but wow, what a blessing to be able to talk to somebody about those things without any inhibition, like the little girl who liked to just, I like to run naked. No sense of inhibition whatsoever. So is there a place in us that is so broken that we just can't expect anything anymore? Is there something in our lives that's so broken and so raw that we just can't conceive that it would ever leave us? Have we been chipped at so long by this world that the wonder of walking with God through this world, somebody who knows everything about you and me and yet wants to be with us, that we could walk in this world with that sense of wonder, thinking, I wonder what God's going to do today. I wonder what He's going to bring into my life. And to not see that as an interruption. I would just say to everybody in this room, including myself, let's bring those things to Him in all honesty, whatever they are, so that, as Paul said in this very text, where the Spirit of God dwells, there is freedom. Where the Spirit of God dwells, there is freedom. Do you and I know that freedom in our lives? We can have it. Paul says so. And Paul spoke pretty convincingly, in my mind, for God Himself. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I